Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session, Powering Privacy Compliance with the Customer Data Platform, or CDP. My name is JC Quimbow, Marketing Manager here at ARM Treasure Data, and I'd like to introduce today's presenter, David Raab. David Raab is the founder and CEO of the Customer Data Platform Institute, which is a vendor-neutral organization that helps companies make the most of their customer data. David is also a longtime marketing technology consultant and industry analyst, and also coined the term Customer Data Platform back in 2013. For some quick housekeeping, an on-demand recorded version will be available after this webinar. Feel free to also view and download the attachments below your screen. Lastly, we'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions during or after today's session, please submit them below, and we will do our best to answer them. Without further ado, David, take it away.
Thank you, JC. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and welcome. So, our topic today is privacy, and privacy has taken center stage. Yeah, there's a few little riots going on in a pandemic, and democracy may be ending, but those are all things that hopefully will be resolved within a few months. Privacy has been an issue, a major issue for several years now, and it will continue to be a major issue for several years going forward. So without certainly diminishing the importance of what else is going on in the world, we do have to deal as an industry with privacy. It's not going to go away. We see legislation going on. We just had the second anniversary of the GDPR enforcement. CCPA will be now enforced within a month. The regs just affirmed yesterday. We see all kinds of technology that is designed to protect privacy, privacy-safe browsers like DuckDuckGo, privacy-safe emailing, encrypted email like Proton Mail. So there's a lot of people who are going around the normal technology to specifically buy privacy technology. And of course, we see people like Google and Firefox blocking third-party cookies. Third-party cookies in particular are a big issue, as we'll see here softly, because so much marketing is built around third-party cookies. But when we hear discussions of privacy, we often hear about the privacy paradox, and you're supposed to have, like, scary music in the background. Sometime we'll get some scary music company to slide, because people are very obsessed with the privacy paradox. And what's the privacy paradox? Well, consumers, they're crazy. On the one hand, they say they want privacy, and on the other hand, they say, I want personalized treatment. And why is that not a paradox? Well, it's actually, to some extent, it is a paradox, okay? Because, yeah, you'll see a survey, and this particularly one came from Ernst & Young Glassbox. 75% of the people say, yes, we worry about companies having too much access to our personalized information. But the same survey, 67% say, well, yeah, I would be willing to share my personal data if you'll give me tailored offers. So, well, which is it, guys? Are you worried about your privacy, or are you willing to give up your privacy for your data? And in reality, it's not that much of a paradox. It actually, if you look at the data just a little more deeply, it turns out that what they really say is, I will share my data if you give me value in return. So it's not really that much of a paradox once you understand what they're saying. They say, yeah, I do value my data, I do value my privacy, but I am willing to give it up if I get something worthwhile. I'm not going to give it up for free. Now, what's that worthwhile? What's that value that I want to get? Well, value certainly equals savings. I want those discount coupons, and it also, even more importantly, in many cases, means convenience. I want you to have a smoother experience. So I want to just click and be able to buy or get my returns processed without filling out a bunch of forms or all those sorts of things. That's mostly what they mean by privacy, but by value. But they also mean they want control over their data, and they want security. They want to know that the data is not going to be leaked accidentally. All right, that's another part of value. So when you really look at what people say they want, those are the things that if you give them, they will give you their data back in return. So the privacy paradox is a bit of a false paradox. All right, it's actually, people are fairly consistent in what they want, but they do want something. So now that we've resolved the privacy paradox, we now have another 35 minutes here with what else can we do. Let's talk about some value equals trust is the bottom line here. If I can trust you to use my data in ways that benefit me and to protect my data, that's the value that I want, and I will give you my data. So now we've resolved that. Let's go on to talk about the big issue in privacy, more than anything else, is third-party data. That's the thing that people are talking to us about, and that's the biggest privacy issue that we see, is of third-party data, third-party cookies in particular, going away. And a lot of the concern in the marketing community is, well, what do we do in the absence of third-party cookies? And I think there's a law someplace that I have to make some pun about cookies crumbling, so consider that done. The thing about third-party cookies, is they're about prospecting, right? They are about reaching people who are not already your customers. But they're really good at prospecting. That's why we like them so much. That's why they've been so widely adopted, right? They have a very broad reach. They are anonymous. It's a bit of a drawback. We'd rather know who we're talking to. But they're great. They track across websites. They give us very precise targeting. We can actually correlate them with results, so we can measure the results of our ads, and they're actually pretty cheap to employ. So third-party cookies have a lot going for them. But they are not the only game in town. And again, they're going to be taken away. We're going to have to find some other ways to do our marketing, our prospecting. Okay? We have a number of options here. We'll talk about each one of these in a minute now. But we have our walled gardens, Facebook, Google, Amazon, the big communities that have their own first-party data that let us advertise through them and reach prospects through them. We have contextual advertising, which is advertising that is simply based on where the ad is. So if you put advertising about sports on a sports website, you don't have to know who it is. You assume they're interested in sports because that's the website they're on. We have alternative IDs, not cookies, but some other kind of ID like device IDs or app IDs. We have second-party data sharing. We'll talk about that. And finally, we have first-party. So let's talk about each of these in just a bit more detail because they're all important. Oops, I think we kind of got ahead of ourselves a little bit there. So, okay, walled gardens, right? So this, again, this is Google, Amazon. They don't share their data, of course, but they have tons of data about their customers, who is on Facebook, who is doing Google, who is using Amazon. So it has pretty broad reach, very broad reach in some cases. Depends on which garden you're in. It's anonymous to you. Facebook knows who it's talking to, but you just put an ad out and have Facebook find those folks, by and large. Can't track it outside of the garden. So it's hard to track across the websites. There's some tracking, but again, very limited amount of that shared with you, even though the garden owners themselves can do that. Good precise targeting, because you target using their data, even though you don't know who it goes to. But we can't measure results by individuals, and the cost is relatively high. So mixed bag. These are all actually going to be mixed bags, I'll tell you right now. Second thing, again, contextual advertising. The publisher's first-party data. The publisher may or may not know who the person is, depending on where they logged in, but they do know, again, that they're looking at this particular web page, and this particular web page has this topic, and they will sell you an ad on a particular web page. This is the way advertising used to be done back in the day. This is, oh, we're going to be on this TV show. We know who the audience is on this TV show, according to Nielsen. So that's contextual advertising. Same on the web, right? So somewhat limited reach because you're limited to a particular publisher, the particular website. Again, some websites have bigger audiences than others. Anonymous to you, if not to the publisher. Can't track it across sites. Can't do too much targeting. Can't do the individual level result measurement. Cost may be high, may be low. Just depends on the page you're advertising on. So on the one hand, it's like the ideal solution. On the other hand, as you see, it actually kind of has a number of drawbacks. Alternate ID. So this is your MAID, your marketing application ID, your app IDs. There's a number of ways that we can get devices to be advertised to. We can track devices. Broad reach, okay, but anonymous-ish. Track it across websites on the same device, which is a good thing. Targeting, we're limited to how much data we really know about that device. We can track the results if we are tracking by device. And the cost is actually pretty easy, pretty low in most cases, just because the ID access is relatively limited. So this is a good thing. This is a pretty good method, good alternative. That's a primary alternative that's offered to third-party cookies. But but there's actually some rumblings in the privacy world that this stuff's going to be blocked too. So we'll see if this continues and in what format. And there are not a lot of people actually working on more proprietary versions of this. So it's an interesting option, but we'll see how much use we get out of it. Second-party data sharing. Second-party data sharing, for those of you who are not familiar with the term, is when two companies make a direct agreement that we're going to share our data with each other, but they don't really want to share their data. They want to like sort of have an exchange. So usually what they do is they put a hashed ID. They take their data. Let's just assume it's an email address or a customer ID. Let's assume it's an email address. They run it through a hashing algorithm that creates a unique code or number for each email address, and everybody uses the same hashing algorithm. So if company A has your email and company B has your email, they both run it through the same hashing algorithm, and they both come up with the same hashed ID. So now they're both giving me customer number 123. So they say, oh, we both have the email that resolves to customer 123, so we both have that customer. So we can exchange that data. And if we want to share data about that customer, we can do that. But we're not telling anything about the other ones that didn't match because all you saw is a number, 456. Well, I don't know who 456 is because I don't have 456, so I can't decode that. So you're kind of sharing the data without exposing any private data that's not already shared. So limited reach to it, anonymous to the extent that if you don't already know who the person is, you're not going to learn who the person is. You typically would do a deal where you would say, okay, you, my partner, send to the people who are on your list who are not already my customers. I don't know who they are. I don't want to know who they are. All I need to know is that you're going to send to them. And you can do whatever segmentation you want, so only send to the ones who live in Oshkosh or whatever it is you want to do. That's great. They can do that without actually sharing the data, so it's anonymous to the advertiser. Can't track them across websites, obviously, but you do get good targeting. You can measure the results. It's a relatively high cost. I mean, you're going to negotiate it, but by inherently, it's a lot of work involved, so it's going to be fairly costly. So second-party data sharing has good advantages, but you have to negotiate every deal. There's a few interesting sort of co-ops involved here, but we won't go into that. And finally, first-party data, data that you own, data that you got directly from your own customers that they gave you voluntarily because they trusted you. Back to trust. Limited reach, because first of all, they're only the ones you already have as customers, and particularly if you're talking about prospecting, kind of by definition, you don't prospect your own customers. Now, of course, you could have first-party data that is information that people gave to you who were prospects and signed up, downloaded a white paper, did whatever they did to give you their ID, joined your newsletter. So it's not strictly useless for prospecting, but it's relatively limited. Most people don't have such a huge list. We do know who they are. That's the good news. Can't really track them except across our own websites. We do get great targeting. We can certainly track what they do with us. And the cost is relatively low because it's data we're already gathering. So first-party data is often offered up as, the solution. You'll hear this a million times. Third-party data is going away, therefore first-party data becomes more important. Well, yeah, kinda, but it doesn't really solve the problem because it doesn't give you the reach in particular that you got from third-party data. So nice little summary of what we're going to do when cookies go away, what are our alternatives and pros and cons here. And as you see, third-party cookies, again, are pretty good. They have a lot of advantages. Other than being anonymous, and some people would argue that anonymity is an advantage too. All right, the walled gardens have some advantages in terms of reach, disadvantages, the contextual ads, again, this sort of makes them look less useful because they are actually pretty useful, but they're not terribly precise. Alternate IDs, other device IDs, again, have advantage, second-party data, first-party. So they're all, they all have their good points and their bad points. Certainly first-party data, as you'll see on that identified individual, is the only way that you can really deal directly with identified individuals. Everything else is some degree of anonymous. Now, some things are more anonymous than others, to be clear. Sometimes we talk about anonymous, so sort of kind of anonymous or anonymous light, because there are ways often to identify these people, but they're at least theoretically anonymous. So we do have a number of advantages, options. So the takeaway here, the world is not coming to an end. At least if it does come to an end, it won't be because of the death of third-party cookies. We have, sadly, other alternatives to consider as world-ending events. But right now, third-party cookies should not be high on your list of things that you worry about ending the world. We do have lots of alternatives. None of those is perfect. They all continue to improve. Lots of smart people and lots of money involved here for getting better solutions, and there are some interesting things going on that will possibly use pre-bid headers, for example, which generate first-party cookies to sort of do a lot of what we previously did with third-party cookies. The industry will survive. Believe it or not, advertising existed before third-party cookies. It even existed before the internet, though few people alive remember those days. And it will continue, even after third-party cookies go away. But mostly, also bear in mind, third-party cookies mostly about prospects, less about customers. So where does that leave us? First-party data, we talked about that a little, but we talked a little about the fact that first-party data is a limited substitute for prospecting. However, when it comes to dealing with customers, first-party is great because we have first-party data about our customers. Hopefully we have a lot of first-party data about our customers. And we talked up front about the privacy paradox and about exchanging data for value. That's all about first-party data. So let's talk about first-party data. It's essential for building relationships via personalization. We all want to do those personalized experiences that people give us. So that's all first-party data. Privacy rules are going to require consent, first-party data. We talked about where consent comes from. It's earned via trust and via value, and it's lost by gratuitous personalization, and gratuitous is defined by the customer. It's what the customer thinks is gratuitous, not what you think is gratuitous. So you have to be careful about personalization. Customers, again, they're willing to give you use of their data when you give them value in exchange. If it's not giving them any value, that's when it feels gratuitous from the customer's perspective. So how can we build trust? We'll go through this a little here, and lots of research on this. Okay, so certainly clear explanations for how the data is used. People really want to know what you're going to do with the data. That ranks very highly in the surveys of what it would take for them to give it to you. Consent mechanisms being prominent, not hidden away. They really want to feel that they've been given that choice. Easy access to data for review and correction and deletion, all the rights that you get under GDPR and CCPA. Compliance with do not promote requests. If somebody says don't promote, you really have to stop promoting them to get really cranky. Otherwise, and now they can sue you. Publicize your data. They want to know your data is secure, so talk to them, explain to them what you're doing, of course, without giving away, a secret that's going to help anybody hack you. But there's lots that you can say about what you do that will make people feel much better about it. And even just addressing the issue, just that they know you're thinking about it, will make them feel better. And of course, if there is a breach, you have to report it and rectify it. So, these are best practices. These are very standard things, not telling you anything that has not been said a million times before, but people have to do it. And lots of people, unfortunately, really don't do this or do the compliance very grudgingly. And no, you have to do it. You might as well make it a positive thing, not something you kind of back into. Which brings us to the star of the show, the star of the first-party data party, customer data platforms, which are, of course, all about first-party data. So how does CDP support privacy? Oh, let us count the ways. Well, and actually, I think we have a slide for each of these, so we won't go through it, this slide in too much detail, but the point is there are lots of things that CDPs do. Let's talk about each one in a little more depth. The first thing we do, which is an important start of it, is the CDP helps you figure out what data you have there. You can't build a CDP without inventorying all of your customer data. So that means having a data dictionary and defining where data comes from and how it's transformed to get into the CDP itself, finding where the PII is hidden, which actually is a big challenge for organizations because it doesn't label itself. You have to actually find the stuff. And then tagging the data to know, okay, this data, and not only tagging it for what data types, but what you're allowed to do with it. So the CDP, in building the CDP, you have to do a lot of the things that you have to do to comply with privacy rules anyway. Unifying that data, all right? So recognizing that all this different data belongs to the same person, which means identity resolution. So how am I going to match up to realize that this email address and that email address are the same person, even though they're two different email addresses, and they relate to this device, and they relate to that cookie if we're still using cookies, and they relate to this account ID, and so on. And I may have different rules for different locations, and I may have different rules for different purposes. I may have a very tight match for privacy compliance purposes. Somebody says, show me your data. You really only want to show them the data that you really know is them. So if you have the matches, you have to make sure those matches are right. Whereas when you're off selecting audiences for advertising, you may have a looser sort of match that just says, well, I don't care if I have a few accounts that are combined incorrectly, because I want to make sure I combine all the ones that are actually accurately compliant for, say, attribution analysis. So different rules for different purposes. I want to have a persistent identifier. So if somebody changes their email address, or they change their postal address, or they change their name, or they change their gender, somebody said the only thing you can't change nowadays is your birth date. If they change anything, I still have some persistent identifier that knows that this is really the same person. It's the mechanical equivalent of a soul. It's the one unchangeable essence of the individual is their persistent identifier. And then, of course, what's my matching and unmatching history? Because we find we make mistakes in matching. We want to turn that on and turn that off. We want to be able to go back and forward and see, okay, how do we match this person at a given point in time? So these are core activities that have to be done to make a CDP work. Some CDPs have identity resolution. Some actually use external identity resolution services. And part of the reason for that is because a lot of identity resolution requires third-party data that's collected by other people, because you don't necessarily know that somebody moved, but the post office knows, and you can buy that data from the post office and put that new and old address in your file, whether or not they reported that to you directly. So there's always going to be some external data involved in identity resolution, regardless of where the algorithms sit. Third thing that a CDP can help you with is consent management. Okay? Some CDPs actually have an entire consent management function, a module. Some CDPs integrate with third-party consent management modules. Perfectly fine, either way, doesn't really matter. I mean, the point is you have to do it. The CDP, someplace you have to have a portal to collect the consent itself and manage the consent. You have to track it over time, because consents are usually for limited periods of time and specific purposes. You have to know what data is governed by which consent rules, how you're allowed to use it. And then you have to integrate with external consent management platforms, again, if you don't have one built into your CDP. But whether or not it's built into the CDP, that underlying data has to be connected to it. So the consent management platforms say, yes, you can use X data. The CDP is where that data is really stored and what really governs how that data is accessed or not, which I think brings us to access policies, right? So indeed, consent is one of the reasons that we can or cannot use a particular piece of data, but there are other rules about location. The rules vary by location. They vary by purpose. These are all privacy rules, of course. They vary by the type of data. So something has to have all those policies embedded in it in some sort of a rules engine that controls, okay, and make sure, okay, this marketing program wants to use this bit of data. Is it really allowed to do that? There's got to be some sort of a policy engine somewhere, and the CDP is going to play a role in that. Again, some CDP vendors will actually have that built in. Others will perhaps connect with a third party, a tool that does that. But the CDP is going to be in the mix regardless. So you have to look at how that's going to be applied and how the CDP is going to either use its own functionalities or work with a third party access policy manager and maintain usage logs, of course. Another rule of the privacy regs is we want to be able to go and look back at the history of how my personal data was used and what was the justification for every usage. So we have to have a log to make that possible, and the CDP is the place, the obvious place to keep that data. And then finally, of course, again, we remember security is a very critical part of building trust. We have to tell the consumer, the customer, that we are having good security against their data, and we actually, in reality, have to have good security against their data as well. So this is data access control. So this is which users are allowed to access which data. How do we control that? And the rules can get quite complex for that. Having encryption on the data to make sure that it's not accessed improperly. So if somebody gets to it, they only see the encrypted data, not the raw data. Having anonymization and pseudonymization, I could never say that, capabilities. So if we want to pull the data out for analytical purposes where we don't really need to know who the particular people involved are, we can anonymize that. And if we anonymize it and we can't go backwards, that's anonymization. If we anonymize it but we can go backwards, that's pseudonymization, so we can do the analysis and then uncover who the persons were if there's a reason to do that. Keeping access logs, again, to know who did what, so we can go back and check if there's an issue. And of course, detecting intrusions to see if somebody from the outside is trying to get at their data, and you know, unfortunately, sometimes they actually get through, so being able to know what happened. So there's functionalities about security that, again, are going to be baked into your CDP. The CDP is not the only place that you manage this kind of security. There are other parts of your system, obviously, that are very important for security, but you have to look at the CDP as part of that solution as well. So, summary, remember this, all right? Privacy rules reflect customer demands. They're not just made up because some crazy regulator worried about. They really reflect the concerns of people. So even if there were no privacy rules, you would still have to actually deal with these customer interests in privacy. And the customer interests in privacy arguably are actually stronger than the privacy rules, at least so far. But customers will trade their data for value. There's maybe a third of the people in the surveys who come up as privacy absolutists. No, I would never give away my data for any purpose. But there's about 2/3 of the population that will make the trade, but they want real value, and that value is maybe it's payment, but it's usually more about savings, so offers that save me money, convenience, having a better customer experience. Control over my data is super important. People really want to know that they can decide, or at least feel that they can decide, and security, that things are not going to happen accidentally. And finally, of course, the CDP helps deliver both that value and that privacy. So CDPs are a very important part of that data privacy toolkit. And I think we can now go on to some questions. Go back to you, JC. What do we got?
Great. Thank you, David, for the great presentation. Yeah, we'll take some questions from the audience. So it looks like the first one is for David. So regarding data types, where do data enrichment services like Clearbit and DataNice sit? And regarding data enrichment services, would love to hear David's take on the utility of such services and how do they relate to CDP strategy?
Okay, well, let me, yeah, those actually are kind of related question, right? They're both about data enrichment services. By definition, third-party data, something like a DataNice is, business data, so it's not necessarily personal data, so it's much less governed by privacy rules. But in either case, whether it's personal data or not personal data, the enrichment services collect it. They should only be sharing data that they're allowed to share, right? So we will just assume that they're all scrupulously gathering consent and following the law, and hopefully the spirit as well as the letter of the law. Companies are kind of being held responsible for that. It really depends on the regulator and sort of what's going on and which regime you're up to. But you want to assume that you're responsible as the buyer of the data, regardless of the legal niceties. So you do want to kind of vet that the data is coming from a place where it's been consented. But assuming that it's been gathered and consented properly, then it's a very important source of getting more information than you can gather directly about your customers. So if you're going to do personalization, there's a lot of very good data out there that tells you more about people or businesses than you can gather directly with your own first-party data. So that third-party, those data enrichment services are extremely valuable as ways of enriching your data, he said tautologically. And they're a very important part of your CDP strategy. Okay, your CDP has the ability to import that data. From the CDP perspective, it's kind of like it's another data source. The processes will vary. Sometimes you send data out to the enrichment vendor and they do the matching, kind of like that second-party process I was discussing. Other times they might send you more data. But whatever, it's a functionality. It's a set of processes you run through. Certainly a CDP can and should be able to handle that, and it just makes your data more valuable. So it's important. Depends on the situation, how important it is. Hopefully that answers that question.
Great, thanks, David. Okay, we have another one. So do CDPs only handle first-party data or also second and third-party data?
CDPs can handle all three types of data. Let's be real clear about that. They're mostly focused on first-party data. That's kind of the big thing that distinguishes them from DMPs, which are more about third-party data, although DMPs can handle anonymous first-party data. CDPs can handle known first-party data. You always have to make the distinction. And sometimes people confuse first-party with known and third-party with anonymous. They're not, the same thing. But CDPs certainly can pull in second and third-party data. Often the second-party data processes will be managed by sort of a trusted neutral third party who often is using CDP technology actually to do that. But sometimes you could, if you trust your partners enough, have your own CDP do the second-party data management. Third-party data, again, you're going to usually import some particular set of third-party data into your CDP. But whoever is managing the third-party data, if there's some compiling whose business it is to manage third-party data, they are quite likely using CDP technology internally as well. But yeah, CDPs for sure handle all three.
Okay, and who are the primary CDP platform providers?
Okay, well, obviously Treasure Data is one of them. All right, paid political advertisement here. Go to www.cdpindustry.org, cdpinstitute.org, which is the Institute's website, and we have a directory of, there's about 100 or so vendors on that. Some of them are members of the Institute. We also publish reports that you can find on that website that list the vendors and give you some sense of their size if you want to know who's bigger or smaller. So that's really the place to go. And the thing to understand is that there are a lot of CDP vendors, and they really vary greatly. So you really want to kind of figure out what kind of CDP vendor you need, and then look at the CDP vendors who are at least in that broad category. Actually, if you look at the industry update reports that we publish back in the appendix of that report, we do classify the vendors into 4 broad categories based on whether they're really just about data management, or if they do that plus analytics or plus campaign management, or even delivery as well. So CDPs have those different scopes, and most people have a pretty clear idea of what kind of CDP they want. So you should look at that before you worry about who the primary ones are or after.
Great, thanks. So for consent collected about cookie data from anonymous users, if later the data is merged to known profiles via unification processes, and if there's conflicts to the consent preference, do you have any thoughts about how to approach that?
I would not want to pretend to be, a privacy legal expert, so I'm a little hesitant to give you a definitive answer, plus I'm still trying to parse the question. For the consent, I don't, honestly, that's for me not to, I don't want to give a wrong answer to that. I don't know, JC, if you have an actual concrete answer to that, but I would say that, honestly, if there's a conflict between preferences, you probably want to go with the most restrictive one. You'll never go wrong there. But let me just go there. I just don't want to give a any correct answer.
Yep, no, fair enough. Thanks, David. And then one more. So how are companies currently doing at complying with existing privacy regulations like GDPR and CCPA?
Well, that's an interesting question, and you know, they're all doing the basic things that they have to do, right? They all, you know, everybody now has a little notification about cookies, and they're doing some kind of consent stuff. The problem is that there's some other things that are you're supposed to do internally, like, you know, have a, you know, privacy first. I forget what the term is now. You know, you're supposed to, you know, like, do privacy impact statements with new systems, and, you know, have a privacy person on staff and all that. Not clear that all the companies are really doing that. So I'm told, and this is really what I'm told by other people, more than what I've seen directly, that, you know, there's like a bit of superficiality to some of the compliance out there. A lot of companies have not really done everything that they're supposed to do. So that's a bit of a concern. And honestly, the surveys that we see of companies will also show that. A lot of companies in a survey anonymously, of course, would say, yeah, our company is not really doing everything we should do. So that's really bothersome. So far, the authorities, more in Europe, you know, and less in the U.S., although California might change that, you know, have been, you know, kind of lax in enforcement. There have been a few actions here and there, but not that many fines. But that may change. You know, the authorities have been, I think, you know, purposely giving people a lot of time to comply, and, you know, you have 6 months, and then you get another 6 months, and yeah, we're still not going to go after too many people, but sooner or later that will change. So, you know, companies really should not assume that they're going to get away with not complying fully. So even if you haven't complied yet, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get in trouble in the future. So it is important for companies who may have just done the superficial compliance to really go ahead and kind of like do everything you're supposed to do before somebody decides to clamp down.
Awesome. Well, that wraps up the questions and the presentation today. Thank you again, David, for presenting on behalf of ARM Treasure Data, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We will see you next time.
Great. My pleasure. One more.
Thanks, everyone.